I have made the decision to word this video as being, purely from my own perspective, because I'm aware of that, everyone's basic value set is going to be different, and I think a person's value set is vastly going to impact how they perceive any subject, but I think particularly the subject of rejection. And so I'm going to frame this all as being from my own experiences, and I just hope that, maybe other people can find things that they find relatable and find it helpful. And I think it's important to think about the question of rejection, even if you're not facing it right now, even if you're just thinking about it, or even if it's something you worry about, because I think that a lot of people make their worst life decisions from a place of insecurity. They make their worst choices when they are not feeling very good about themselves. And the thing is, even if you're not actually facing rejection in your relationships, there may be moments where you act from a place of fearing it. And those actions typically aren't going to be your best choices. They're typically going to be things that are potentially hurtful and rude to others, or they're going to be things that are just very insecure things to do, that are just injurious to yourself and often injurious to the people around you as well. So I think this is, a valid thing to think about, even if your life is going fine. But a thing that happened to me a few weeks back was that I managed to get rejected by 4 different guys in the space of about 2 weeks. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, Shona, how do you move between men that quickly? And the truth is that's not really how the situation occurred. And in fact, each rejection happened very differently and for very different reasons. And I think that as I explain how each successive rejection occurred, there are lessons that can be learned from those experiences. And I feel it's worthy to talk about because I'm historically somebody who takes rejection incredibly badly. As in, when I was much younger, if a guy rejected me, I would want to die. I would feel like everything was awful. Like, food tasted bad, the sky was grey, nothing was good. And I felt obligated to feel that way. I felt somehow like if I didn't feel bad enough when I got rejected, it meant that I didn't really believe in the concept of love and relationships, which I don't think that's really true. But anyway, so for me to be facing 4 different rejections in the space of maybe it was even 1 week, it was very quick, um, and for me to come out of it laughing and smiling and actually feeling really good about myself, for me represents a significant amount of personal progress. Because, I had been doing therapy recently, and what this tells me is that the therapy is working really, really well. So I'm very happy about that. And also just happy to know that I can go through something like that and survive. And to know that unconsciously or consciously I was preparing myself to be able to deal with a situation like that as well as I did. Okay, so the first rejection I encountered in that time was I was contacted by a boyfriend who I had dated years ago, and he was a very important part of my life for years, and we were very close. But then things went terrible, and, a lot of things that I'd been overlooking in the relationship became very noticeable to me, so I cut him off. I had to break up with him, even though at the time it was incredibly painful. But yeah, after the fact of the breakup, I really wanted to be able to maintain a friendship with him because he had just been so important to me. He had been a role model to me in a lot of ways. And, in fact, I'd go so far as to say the permutation of my identity you're seeing right now would not exist had I never met him. So, I was really keen to be friends with him, but he was just so angry about the breakup. So I think for years now, he's just stayed angry at me. And I hoped that once he had a new girlfriend and that relationship was going well, he would forgive me and be able to consider having a real friendship with me. So when I heard that he was engaged, I was really happy. I was like, great, he can be part of my life again. He can, we can reconnect and be friends. And I was really excited, and he actually did contact me one day, and it seemed like we were having a really great conversation throughout the day, and then suddenly, at the end of the day, he sends me footage of himself jerking off, and, suddenly he's ghosting me, and again, normally I would be horrified by that. Like, in the past he had done, vague, milder versions of this, but this was like the worst time, and yet for some reason it wasn't getting to me that much. And I think a big part of the reason it wasn't getting to me anymore was because it was part of a pattern of behavior on his part. I knew him well enough, first of all, to know that the real reason he was acting this way was because he was still angry at me. And the reason he was still angry at me was because I had meant so much to him at one point, just as he had meant so much to me. So in a bizarre way, even though the behavior he was performing was actually cruel and rejecting, the way in which he performed it, the fact that it happened at all, told me that I had to mean something to somebody at some point, otherwise why would I even be worth doing this to? And, so in the takeaway for me is that sometimes in life it can seem like people are being rejecting. It can seem like they're being really cruel, and they often are. But the cruelty isn't coming from a place of them not wanting anything to do with you in some cases, or necessarily being indifferent to your existence. Sometimes the fact that they would bother to go to that lengths to be that cruel is actually evidence that you're actually important to them. Like, I'm not saying that I want to deal with him anymore, because just I feel very strongly that he should have consulted with, like, that in general, a guy should communicate with a woman about that aspect of life before he does that sort of thing. And, I don't like to be overly judgmental about that, because I think in life, conflicts in value and misunderstandings can occur, and so I would prefer to be like, okay, this is a thing that happens, and, to not take it too personally. But just my point, my point there is, there are different ways, I guess, of being important to people. So, that's one stance you can take on rejection. The next rejection I went through was a lot harder, because it was a guy who I had met at a church, and he had led me to believe that he and I could potentially date in the future. And so he was talking like, oh, I'll get to know you, you can get to know me as you keep coming to this church, and things are going to be great. And, well, he didn't say things would be great, but he implied very heavily that he was going to take the time to get to know me, and things were going to be great, in that sense. But as I continued to be at that church, what I found was that he was avoiding me. As in, I would sometimes go up to him and try to say hi, and he would sort of, look at me like I was like an alien. So I kind of knew he had not been entirely honest. And I ended up talking to him about it later, and he was like, yeah, I had wanted to reject you, but I was scared that if I did, you would stop coming to my church. And the irony was, if he had rejected me back when I had first confronted him, I would have been fine continuing going there, because I was actually fully emotionally prepared for rejection. And so to have him suddenly be like, oh no, actually there's hope here, it gave, you know what I mean? It meant that I invested a lot more into the situation than I should have. And so at the time, I was actually heavily disgruntled, I was distressed, I was going through a lot of the usual cycles of thought and feeling that I go through in the aftermath of a more painful rejection. The things of going, well, okay, maybe later on he could still get to know me and change his mind, or, okay, maybe this is all just a misunderstanding, or, okay, maybe, you know what I mean, just bargaining and you know what I mean? It's like the stages of death, basically. The stages of grief. And but the thing is, because I'd been through this cycle enough times, I sort of recognized that I was going through the same exact paths that I had gone through in earlier rejections that I had experienced, And I was able to recall, well, hang on, each of those times I had those rejections, I took it so hard because I was thinking, oh no, I'll never feel this way about someone again. I'm going to just end up alone, die alone, feel miserable. And, you know, but then later on, obviously I must have met other people that I found interesting and felt attracted to, or even had a potential, you know, what's the word for it? Like, there was a potential that they could have requited my feelings later, perhaps. But, you know, the point is that life went on, you know, and so from that I was able to go, okay, as horrible as a rejection might seem in the moment, it only seems so bad because I'm expecting it to be a permanent state of things rather than just, you know what I mean, a temporary phase in my life. Because yes, I mean, arguably, if a person never changes their mind about you, then yes, their rejection of you is permanent, but that doesn't mean you don't get to have a life away from that, which is something I didn't know when I was younger. I used to allow a rejection to become my whole world until I fell in love with somebody else or grew to like somebody else. And I couldn't, you know what I mean? I couldn't have any objectivity about it at all. And, you know, so to be able to be like, okay, this has happened, and yet my life is still alright, you know, I still have all of the things I love doing, I still have my room and, you know, the things that comfort me, and, you know what I mean? The rejection didn't take any of that away, so why should I be that upset about it? You know, and, I mean, yeah, on one of my videos, somebody commented saying, well, actually, the thing that makes rejection hard is that you get this byproduct of feeling inadequate. And I don't disagree. I think that there is that, but the contention behind being rejected and then feeling inadequate as a consequence, again, it's the assumption that this person has assessed you correctly. Now, the thing that I'll tell you about this guy who rejected me, he never actually took the time to get to know me properly. Every time that he and I would end up talking, he would just talk so much. I could never get a word in edgeways. And, well, not never, but just so little that it was very much as though he didn't know who I was. So I very much had the comfort of knowing that the version of me he had rejected was whatever he had come up with in his head. He definitely he wasn't rejecting the real me. And that was comforting. And it was also comforting to know that I could esteem somebody as much as I had esteemed him at one point. And yet, he was clearly quite socially defective. Like, I have this unfortunate tendency to idealize people when I like them, like to a ridiculous extent sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, the good observations I make of them aren't true, but I mean that I tend to only notice the good things, and I don't notice the bad things. And that was very much the case with this guy, where I kept trying to give him the benefit of the doubt on his more selfish behaviors. And so when he rejected me, yeah, in some ways I actually felt glad that he had, because I could tell he was just not a good guy to be with. And, you know, that's another thing. Sometimes when a person rejects you, you're actually dodging a bullet. There's other stories from my life I could tell, but let me see. The fourth rejection. The fourth rejection was my favorite rejection. So for years I've had this male friend who I was going to church with for a while. Oh, wait, did I tell the third rejection? I can't even remember the third rejection now. That's how well it went. Is that what's happened? Oh well, if I remember it, I'll come back to it. You know, it's the middle of the night, I'm half asleep, but I'm having trouble sleeping, so I'm making this video anyway. But basically, yeah, the fourth rejection was my favorite rejection, because, so that, you know, he'd been a guy who I'd gone to church with for years, as I said. And when I first met him, I kind of thought that maybe he had a crush on me, because every time I would talk to him, he would turn kind of pink, and like a little bit, and, you know, at first I was like, he's not much to look at, but I got to know him better, and I thought, oh, maybe dating him would be nice. Maybe marrying him one day would be nice, And so I held that in the back of my mind for a period of time, until eventually a very good opportunity happened to crop up for sitting and talking with him about all of this. And, I wasn't like directly like ask him out, because that's I already had very strong suspicions about him that he wasn't really the relationshipy type, that he didn't like he'd already said things that suggested to me that he wasn't like yay relationships. And so yeah, I knew better than to just come out guns blazing and be like, yeah, go out with me. And really at that point I wasn't 100% sure it was what I wanted either. So I was like talking with him, getting to know him a bit better than I had, really, because even though we'd known each other for years, we didn't really do deep talking that much, which, at this point we did. And I revealed to him that at different points I had wondered if maybe he had been attracted to me, and that, I had thought about, maybe dating him. Like, it was a big maybe. It wasn't like I was, like, super, like, yeah, he's awesome. It was just like, he seems like a good guy. He seems like he could offer a woman a stable life, and he seems very kind. And, it was an interesting thing where he was like, well, no, sure enough, the age difference between us is so great that I definitely couldn't think of you in that light. But the thing is, because he faced me so honestly, I actually felt really validated that he was just honest with me about what he really thought. And, he was speaking to me so kindly, and, the conversation we had was a very deep one, actually, so it left me feeling just, so, you know what I mean? There was something inside me that was filled up by it. Something that had been missing. And, like, more importantly, perhaps, I shouldn't say more importantly as if my own feelings are all that matters. I don't think that. But, at the end of the evening, he gave me a really big hug, and, and I could tell it wasn't just like a consolatory sort of I feel sorry for you kind of hug. It was, he meant it, he cared about me, and I could feel it. And he didn't have to even say so. I could tell it from how he was behaving towards me. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it, because it was like, for me that was the moment when I realized that somebody could care about me even though I'm old. Like, that was the moment when I realized that even if I lose all attractiveness to men, even if I become, like, completely sexless and uninteresting that way, I can still be cared about. Someone can still care about me and still want me around. And that for me was a really important lesson. And I think it's an important thing, I think, for a lot of people to learn if they're excessively stressing the value of romantic relationships in their life. Like, I'm not pooing on romantic relationships. When they work out, I think they're a thing of beauty, and I'm, for the people who can do well in them, bravo, well done. But, for people like me who keep getting rejected over and over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where it's, maddening, frankly, to the point where it can get really frustrating and stressful at times. You know what I mean? The sensation that you can be so radically loved and accepted in another way is an incredible feeling. It's a wonderful feeling. He and I even briefly sort of bartered and were like, well, what if we get tremendously old and we can't find anyone? Could we just marry by default then? And he was like, yeah, why not? When we're 60-something, if we're desperate and alone, then we can marry. And I said to him, well, but really 60? That doesn't seem very high. I would have put it at like 70 plus. And he was like, well, yeah, but at 60, you're old enough to, like, you're past most of your prospects, but you still have enough years together. And I'm really glad that he said that, because, when a guy says something like, oh yeah, I'll marry you if I'm alone and desperate when I'm old, it's very easy to take it to mean, like, he would only marry you if he was old and alone and desperate, which on obviously on a certain level he meant it that way, but on another level, for him to say that he would want to spend some years with me, again, it left me feeling very much validated. Yeah, it was quite reassuring in a weird way. And he and I continue to be friends, and in a couple of weeks' time, he and I will be meeting up and doing some fun stuff together. Yeah. And so just, yeah, even though admittedly when I do imagine myself being rejected again, and like for me those fears are ringing louder right now because I do actually really like the guy that I've been talking to. Like, I try to convince myself within my heart that he's not that big of a deal. And he's a human being. He has his own flaws. He has his own things going on, of course. But, it, I do actually really like him. And part of the reason I'm finding things so stressful is precisely because I know that if he rejects me, it's going to feel bad. And it's scaring me. And but I guess I can be proud and glad that this event happened where I went through that quick succession of rejections of different kinds, because what it means is that I can go through that and live. And if I can survive because normally if I'm rejected even by just one guy, I would be devastated for like weeks. Whereas, this situation I got over very quickly. In fact, with the last rejection, it took me no time. I think I've forgotten to describe the third one, but if I can't remember it, it's probably not worth talking about. But yeah, life is full of rejection, and it's. I think people do a lot of lame things precisely because they're. Like, sometimes you are the rejecter, and as a result, you say horrible things to the person you're rejecting because you want to convince yourself that they deserve what you're doing, or that, yeah, like, it's happened a couple of times now where I've been rejected by really nice guys, but because they're so keen to keep up that sense of being a nice guy, they had to, like, convince themselves that they were rejecting me just because I'm, like, there's something horribly, horribly wrong with me. And, yeah, I can understand where they're coming from. When I have to reject guys, I'm sometimes incredibly uncomfortable with it. Like, I have this stuffed animal I keep in my bed, partly because, and like, I bought this animal in the first place because I had to reject a guy, and I knew that I was going to find it really, really stressful and upsetting because I had actually been enjoying his company, and I very strongly suspected that once I rejected him, he was not going to want to talk to me anymore at all, and I was very distressed. And, well, not very distressed, but I was, apprehensive. So I got this thinking, well, I'll be a bit lonely for a while, and I can hug the doll, until things get better. And, yeah, I predicted quite accurately that, yeah, he stayed my friend for a while after the rejection, but then, yeah, after a while he didn't want to be friends even on Facebook anymore, and, so that's done. Another time I had to reject a guy. I did actually really like him, but I could tell he and I were not compatible, and so, like, and incompatible to the extent where parting ways was needed. And yeah, it was really hard to do because he had actually been really, really, really sweet to me. Like, he was the first guy I had hung out with who had actually really been gentlemanly and sweet towards me, and had, he, I want to tell the story, but maybe now's not the time. But yeah, just rejections aren't fun for either person, really, and I think it is easy to forget that, the person forming the rejection can sometimes be under an immense level of stress. And, you know, I mean, one of those guys who rejected me, like, part of the reason he had been so bad was because he knew that he and I had a lot of mutual contacts, and he was very much worried about what would happen with them once he had rejected me. you know, he really wanted to keep me going to his church. And, you know, I mean, my feeling is if you need to move on, you move on. Like, you shouldn't feel pressured to stay if it's really stressing you out and upsetting you. And, yeah. Like, obviously, if you feel like you can manage the stress, it's good for you. Like, right now, like, I've been going through phases of feeling stressed about the guy that I'm sort of currently seeing. But I think that it's healthy. I think that it's actually been good for me because, you know, there's an extent to which I'm learning to grow the muscle of patience and the muscle of not assuming the worst, not leaping to the worst possible assumptions as soon as something unpredictable happens, which is what I have historically done, and I'm really glad that I'm having the opportunity to unlearn that. Does that mean that I'm assuming that this guy isn't about to reject me? No, no. In fact, yeah, just about every day I wake up and I'm expecting to open my phone and find a message from him saying words to the effect of, "Yeah, Shona, I think you and I both know this isn't working out. Let's not see each other anymore. I'll go my way, you go yours," etc. You know, I am constantly expecting that from him, actually. But, yeah. I mean, the underlying assumption behind, I think, taking rejections poorly, I think, is always the assumption that it's somehow a statement about your ability to be loved and accepted, ultimately. But if you refuse to take it that way, if you hang on to the fact that you do still have other people in your life who do care for you, and it does help if you cultivate a lot of friendships for yourself, give yourself things to look forward to, try to love yourself. It gets so much easier to handle a rejection, like so much easier, you wouldn't believe. And again, I'm going to recommend CBT. I'm going to recommend cognitive behavioral therapy because it is just so good. It is just so helpful. But in life you always have a choice about how you interpret a situation. And, you know, you're not obligated to take it personally when someone rejects you. You can. No one is going to make that illegal, but it's probably more helpful if you try to take it as a statement about the other person and their situation, because ultimately they can only ever reject the conception they have of you. They can, you know what I mean? They won't know every little thing about you. They won't really get who you are on the inside. And it's okay to be rejected by somebody who doesn't, because of course then they're not rejecting the true you. They're rejecting what they think of you, which sometimes is fair enough. Sometimes is better. I feel like I'm waffling a lot now, so I'm going to stop. But yeah, thank you for watching, and yeah, Jesus loves you very, very much, and so do I. And yeah, have a good weekend coming up.